There's a kind of longing that lives deep in the body, subtle, insistent, ancient. It stirs quietly in the early hours of the morning, or in the stillness after desire has passed, whispering of something more. Not just touch, not just pleasure, but power. And maybe, somewhere along the way, you were told that this longing was shameful, that it was dangerous, that it needed to be silenced. So you tried, you pressed it down, you redirected it into distractions or guilt. But it never really left, did it? Because it was never meant to be buried. It was meant to be understood. Desire is not sin. It is not shame. It is not proof of your weakness. It is the raw current of spirit moving through form. It is the most primal evidence that life is still trying to become more through you. And when we misunderstand this energy, when we repress it or distort it, we lose access to one of the most powerful forces available to us. Neville Goddard called it imagination, not the childish escape we were taught to abandon, but the divine act of creation itself. When this energy of longing meets the sacred space of inner vision, something extraordinary begins to unfold. And Joe Dispenza reminds us that when desire is held with intention, when thought and emotion become coherent, it doesn't just influence the body, it bends the field. It shifts the probabilities of what's possible. But for most people, that power never turns into form because it leaks. It gets hijacked by fantasy, buried under guilt, numbed by habits. And the energy that was designed to create becomes the energy that distracts. This is not your fault. You were taught to be afraid of your own fire. You were taught that desire needed to be controlled, hidden, shut down. But what if that fire was sacred? What if suppression was never the answer? Not spiritually, not biologically, not energetically. Picture this. Sexual energy is a river. When ignored, it floods or dries out. When misused, it erodes the banks of your focus. But when channeled with reverence, it becomes nourishment. It irrigates the soil of your intention. It animates your visions. It creates miracles, not by force, not by fantasy, but through alignment, through presence, through sacred direction. This is not a lesson in repression. This is an invitation into alchemy, the alchemy of redirection, the subtle art of becoming a conscious vessel through which desire becomes design, through which longing becomes language, through which energy becomes life. What you're about to discover is not a shortcut. It's a remembrance of who you are beneath the conditioning, beneath the shame, beneath the noise. In the next minutes, we'll explore what happens when you stop trying to silence desire and start learning to speak its language, to listen, to guide, to hold. Because when you do, the current shifts, the field responds, and what once felt like temptation becomes transmission, creation, manifestation. You don't need to be someone else. You only need to remember how to feel, how to imagine, how to direct. That's the real miracle. And it begins here. There's a reason why desire for so many comes laced with unease, a quickening of the pulse followed by a tightening in the chest, a spark of longing immediately chased by a shadow. Something in the body recoils as if preparing for danger, and perhaps in a way, it is. Not the danger of desire itself, but the danger of what it once led to: abandonment, rejection, shame, punishment. These memories do not live in the mind alone. They live in the cells, in the nervous system, in the quiet places where the conscious voice cannot always reach. The body remembers what the mind has tried to forget. It remembers the moment desire was met with silence, the time longing turned into loss. It remembers the guilt inherited from dogma and the fear encoded by culture. It remembers being told that wanting too much makes you dangerous, unworthy, unclean. And so it learned to associate pleasure with punishment, safety with suppression, wholeness with the absence of want. These are not just stories. They are biological realities. The limbic system, our emotional brain, learns through repetition and experience. When desire has been consistently followed by pain, it begins to treat desire itself as a threat. It does not ask whether the memory is true. It only asks, did we survive? And if survival meant shutting down, it will shut down again, not because it's broken, but because it's trying to protect you. This is why so many manifestation techniques seem to fall flat, not because the practice is wrong, but because the self is split. One part reaches forward with hope, while another pulls back with fear. One part tries to imagine the life it longs for, while another braces for the collapse. And until these parts are brought into coherence, no visualization, no affirmation, no effort can fully anchor the desired reality. The signal is too fractured. The frequency is unstable. This is the hidden wound, the place where energy stalls, the place where dreams dissolve before they take form. And it is not healed through willpower. It is healed through presence, through safety, through deep listening to the body's silent screams. When we begin to understand this, truly understand it, not with the mind alone, but with the full compassion of our being, something softens, something releases. And in that release, we create space. Space for desire to be safe. Space for longing to become sacred. Space for energy to flow, not as threat, but as invitation. There is a quiet erosion that happens when desire has no place to land, a slow, almost imperceptible drain. You don't always notice it at first. It shows up as restlessness, as fatigue, as the sense that no matter how much you imagine, nothing quite materializes. The vision is clear, the heart is sincere, but the energy, it vanishes. It slips through the cracks of attention, craving, distraction. And this too is not your fault. It is the design of a culture that has trained us to discharge energy, not to contain it, to seek release, not resonance. In a world saturated with hyperstimulation, the nervous system becomes exhausted. Constant input, constant fantasy, constant peaks with no integration. The dopamine loop takes over, short-term pleasure replacing long-term creation. The body learns to chase the high of desire's spark without ever allowing that spark to become fire. And when that happens, the voltage needed to fuel real manifestation begins to fade. Not because desire isn't present, but because it's being fragmented into impulses that never reach completion. Each moment of unconscious discharge, whether through habit, fantasy, or emotional escape, creates a vacuum, a subtle weakening of will. And the universe, as responsive as it is, does not move to fill a void. It responds to coherence, to clarity, to the presence of undivided intention. When your energy is scattered, your signal becomes diluted. And diluted signals don't move mountains. They barely ripple the field. This is not a condemnation of desire. It is a call to presence, a recognition that the body craves rhythm, not just release. That sacred energy, when constantly poured out without awareness, cannot build. It cannot rise. It cannot manifest. But when we begin to notice the leak, when we start to pause, to breathe, to feel the full wave without collapsing into it, something begins to shift. There is a power in the sacred pause, in the moment before reaction, in the breath that reclaims the current and brings it back into the heart. That moment is not repression, it is redirection. It is the act of becoming the vessel again, of choosing to hold energy, not as tension, but as intention. And in that holding, you become magnetic, not by doing more, but by allowing more coherence, more presence, more signal. And that is where miracles begin, not in the fantasy of what you desire, but in the fullness of how you hold it. There is a strange thing that happens when we try to push something away. It grows stronger, not in truth, but in tension, in weight, in presence. The more we resist what we feel, the more it circles back, louder, sharper, more demanding, and desire is no exception. We are taught that to be spiritual is to rise above craving, to cleanse ourselves of longing, to purify by abstention. But this is not transcendence. It is avoidance dressed as virtue, and avoidance, no matter how noble it appears, cannot transform what it refuses to face. Desire is not the enemy. The mind that fears it is. The untrained, unheld, unobserved mind that assumes desire will consume, destroy, or derail. But desire doesn't destroy. Suppressed desire does. Denied desire becomes distorted. It twists into addiction, fantasy, obsession, not because the desire itself is impure, but because it has nowhere sacred to go. It becomes like steam, trapped in a sealed container. Pressure builds, and eventually it bursts. There is another way, a way not of resistance, but of reverence. It begins by allowing desire to fully exist without rushing to act on it or shut it down, to feel the heat rise in the body and not flinch, to breathe through it, to witness it, to let it speak, not with the expectation that it must be fulfilled, but with the understanding that its presence alone is sacred. This is the beginning of transmutation, not the silencing of fire, but the holding of it. Conscious burning, a kind of sacred containment that neither suppresses nor spills. It is a dance between impulse and awareness, between longing and stillness. And it is here, in this in-between, that energy begins to change form. When we stop fighting desire, we begin to listen to it. And when we listen, we learn. We discover that what we truly want is not always what the surface craves. We discover that desire is not simply physical, it is spiritual. It is the voice of the soul reaching for its next becoming. And in that recognition, we soften. We stop trying to dominate our inner world. We start collaborating with it. Desire is not here to punish you. It's not here to test your purity. It's here to move you, to wake you, to guide you into greater alignment. And when you stop resisting, you stop suffering. You enter the space where alchemy becomes possible, where what once felt like burden becomes blessing, where the energy that once pulled you apart begins to pull you forward, into coherence, into power, into truth. There comes a moment when the body, no longer at war with itself, becomes ready to receive, not in theory, not as a concept, but as sensation, as truth, as vibration. This is the turning point, the threshold where energy once dissipated begins to gather, where scattered longing becomes precise intention, where imagination, infused with presence, becomes the medium through which reality is re-scripted. Neville Goddard called it living in the end, not pretending, not hoping, but inhabiting, feeling with full conviction that what you seek is already yours. But when this teaching meets the terrain of sensual presence, when it roots not just in the mind, but in the body, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The body cannot tell the difference between memory and vision when emotion is sincere, when sensory detail is vivid, when breath, heartbeat, and inner image come into resonance. The future begins to feel familiar, and what is familiar to the body becomes accessible to the field. Desire, once felt as ache, begins to transmute into signal, into command, not because you force it, but because you hold it with such intimacy, such clarity, that the nervous system begins to align with the outcome. The field responds to who you are being, not what you are wishing, and the body is the tuning fork. Close your eyes. Breathe into the space behind your sternum. Let yourself see, not with the eyes, but with the skin, with the pulse, with the inner rhythm. Feel what it would feel like to already be inside the reality you seek. Not abstractly, sensually, viscerally. Smell the air of that future. Hear the sounds that surround it. Taste the presence of safety, of abundance, of fulfillment. Not because you are escaping the present, but because you are anchoring a higher frequency into it. This practice is not indulgence. It is instruction. It teaches the body to trust what it once feared. It trains the heart to beat in time with the reality not yet visible. And it elevates desire from craving to communion. When breath becomes bridge and vision becomes prayer, you become the vessel through which the unseen becomes seen. There was once a woman whose longing was so deep it nearly unraveled her. Financial despair, a sense of failure, years of effort without reward. But instead of collapsing into hopelessness, she chose to transmute. Every morning she sat in silence, not to escape her pain, but to feel it without judgment. And then, with tears on her cheeks and fire in her belly, she imagined, not the numbers in her bank account, but the feeling of freedom, the sound of laughter returning to her home, the weight lifting from her chest. She felt it until her body began to believe it. And slowly, reality shifted. Not all at once, but undeniably, because she had stopped waiting, she had started becoming. This is the essence of transmutation: desire becoming design, longing becoming language, imagination, no longer passive, becoming the very instrument of transformation. There is a sacredness to the current that moves through your body, even if no one ever told you so. You may have been taught to treat it as animal, base, unruly, something to tame, something to survive. But what if this current was never meant to be subdued? What if it is not primitive at all, but primordial, not low, but foundational, the origin of all form, seeking once again to express itself through you? Sexual energy is not a distraction from the spiritual path. It is the path. When honored, it is the fire that can either burn or illuminate, depending on the one who holds the torch. In the hands of the unaware, it becomes compulsion. In the heart of the reverent, it becomes creation. What shifts the trajectory is not the intensity of the fire, but the intention behind it. In ancient tantric wisdom, this energy was known as Shakti, pure life force, sacred and ascending. It was never separated from the divine. It was the divine, clothed in sensation, longing to rise. And now, as science catches up to mysticism, we begin to see what these sages always knew, that the same current that stirs arousal also activates the pineal gland, that the charge of desire, when held in presence, initiates coherence in the brain and nervous system. That sexual energy is not just biological, it is electrical, magnetic, intelligent. This energy is not yours in isolation. It is the universe moving through your form. It is the intelligence of creation itself, whispering, there is more life, more becoming, more love, not just of another, but of truth itself. When this current rises, it does not ask for shame. It asks for stewardship, not control, not release, but sacred direction, conscious reverence. To walk this path is not to suppress desire, nor is it to act out every impulse. It is to meet desire with stillness, with breath, with devotion, to become the altar on which energy is transmuted into vision, sensation into intention, fire into light. When this shift occurs, when you stop seeing your desire as proof of your lack and begin to see it as the signature of the divine within you, you are no longer battling instinct. You are aligning with essence. Your desire is not a mistake. It is not a weakness. It is a sacred flame, longing not just for pleasure but for purpose. And when it is held with reverence, it becomes the most powerful creative force you will ever know. There is a rhythm in the universe that speaks not in sound, but in silence. A pulse that expands and contracts, a breath that inhales and pauses before the exhale begins. And just like the heart must rest between beats, transformation too requires stillness, not absence, not emptiness, but a sacred pause where what was imagined begins to integrate. It is in this silence that the alchemy completes. Not during the spark of desire, not during the fire of visualization, but after, in the stillness between pulses. Most people speak their desires loudly. They think about them, script them, obsess over them, but few truly listen. Few enter the silence that follows the sacred act of imagination, and without that listening, the signal is incomplete. Without that space, the field cannot respond. Because coherence is not created through noise, it is created through alignment, through resonance, and resonance lives in stillness. After the breath of desire, there must come the breath of surrender. This is not giving up, it is giving over. It is placing what was held so carefully into the space where the unseen begins to organize, where probability begins to bend, where the subtle instructions sent out from your coherent field are received by something larger. Call it the quantum, the divine, the unified mind. In this space, you do nothing, but your being speaks everything. You are not visualizing, affirming, correcting. You are sitting in pure presence, vibrating in the frequency of already. No demand, no grasping, just deep, embodied trust, just stillness that hums with intelligence. This moment is not passive, it is potent, like soil that has just received the seed, like a canvas, quiet after the first strokes of color. The miracle does not come from effort, it comes from coherence. And coherence is amplified in silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of surrender, of integration. This is the missing half of transmutation, the part where the charge becomes channel, the part where desire becomes direction. It is where the universe does its unseen work, arranging, shifting, preparing the outer to match the new inner. And if you rush past this moment, you interrupt the unfolding. But if you sit with it, if you allow the silence to hold you, you begin to feel something subtle but unmistakable, your field recalibrating, your vibrations stabilizing, your intention becoming real, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply true. And that truth is what creates, quietly, powerfully, precisely. Change, true change, does not come in one dramatic moment. It comes in rhythm, in sequence, in repetition that becomes revelation. And so, if desire is to be transmuted, not just managed, not just repressed, but rewritten, it must be given a new container, a sacred rhythm that brings the body, the mind, and the field into alignment. This is the 7-day rewire, not as a formula, but as a ritual, a recalibration, a return. The first 2 days are about clearing, not forcing silence, but detoxing from the noise that numbs, the overstimulation of images, the constant scrolling, the habits that keep the nervous system in a loop of craving without satisfaction. These days are not about shame. They are about giving the body space to breathe again, to feel its own signal, to listen without being hijacked by the external. The system begins to reset. The leak begins to close. Days 3 and 4 awaken the sacred imagination. With the body quieter, the inner world becomes more accessible. These are the days of embodiment, of sensual visualization, not the fantasy that escapes reality, but the vision that roots a new one. Here, you begin to feel the outcome as if it were already in motion. Breath becomes a bridge. Emotion becomes a guide. Sensation becomes the language. You are no longer asking, you are remembering. Days 5 and 6 are the fire. This is where you hold desire without collapsing into it, where you breathe through the charge, not to discharge it, but to alchemize it. It is the conscious burn, the sacred tension. The body wants to release, the mind wants to rush, but you sit, you stay, you hold. And in this holding, something transforms. The energy condenses, the field strengthens, the signal becomes clear, and then comes day 7, the release. Not of energy, but of attachment, the full surrender, the letting go that is not abandonment, the stillness that follows devotion. Here, you stop directing and begin receiving. You enter the silence with reverence, letting the unseen respond. You do not reach, you open. You do not grasp, you allow. Throughout these 7 days, coherence is tracked not by outcomes, but by inner shifts. Through journaling that reflects feeling, not just thought. Through somatic check-ins that ask gently, how does truth feel in the body today? Not to measure progress, but to cultivate intimacy, presence, integrity between what you feel, what you choose, and what you become. This is the rewire, not mechanical, not rigid, but living, breathing, sacred. It is the architecture of new vibration, built 1 day at a time, 1 breath at a time, 1 choice at a time. And as the days unfold, you are not just preparing to manifest, you are becoming the version of yourself who already has. There comes a moment in every journey of transformation when something deeper than knowledge is required, when information must become embodiment and theory must become truth. This is where science meets soul, where biology meets belief, where matter is shaped not by chance, but by coherence. Bruce Lipton reminds us that our beliefs are not just thoughts. They are instructions. Instructions that shape biology, that alter chemistry, that rewrite the language of our cells in real time. Every time you choose reverent redirection over unconscious reaction, you are not just thinking differently, you are becoming different. You are recalibrating the very substance of your being. And Greg Braden adds a crucial thread to this tapestry: emotion. Not as something to suppress, but as the language that speaks to the field. Emotion, when aligned with intention, does not merely echo within your body. It ripples into the quantum. It informs the fabric of reality. When desire is held in coherence, not with fear, not with grasping, but with sacred presence, it becomes a command, a silent, unshakable clarity that the universe cannot ignore. But the real miracle is not just what begins to manifest. It is who you become in the process. The shift from suppression to sovereignty, from shame to sacredness, from scattered longing to precise creation. Sexual transmutation is not about control. It is about reverence. It is the art of holding fire without being burned, of letting desire rise, not as something to resist or obey, but as something to meet with presence, with breath, with purpose. Your body is not a battleground. It is a temple. Your desire is not a flaw. It is sacred fire. And your mind, quiet, conscious, aligned, is the altar where creation begins. In this space, miracles are no longer rare. They are remembered. They are returned. They are revealed in the simple, steady rhythm of becoming who you truly are. So the question now is not whether you are worthy of desire. It is whether you are willing to treat that desire as holy. Whether you are willing to hold it, not as burden, but as invitation, not as weakness, but as the very spark of your becoming. Because in the end, the miracle is not something you get. It's something you remember, something you feel, something you allow to rise, slowly, powerfully, through the silence, through the body, through you.